Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Kalispera se όλους. It is my great pleasure to welcome you today on behalf of the American Club to our annual Claims and Loss Prevention Seminar here in Piraeus. This is actually our 19th, if I'm not mistaken. So we are very proud of this tradition that we continuously strive to enhance in this ever-evolving risk environment. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces today and some new ones joining us. As a liability insurance, at the heart of the American Club's mission lies a powerful goal to help ship owners and operators navigate risk with confidence, not only through dynamic claims handling, but also through education, collaboration, and proactive loss prevention. Today's seminar brings together distinguished experts who will share their valuable insights into some of the most pressing issues shaping our industry's risk environment today, from digital threats and regulatory transitions to evidence preservation and safety culture. We are delighted to welcome Mr. Ralph Clammah, CEO and co-founder of Blacklight AI, who will address the critical topic of cybersecurity, a growing concern for all maritime stakeholders in the digital era. Next, our colleague, Ms. Mariana Katsimicha, claims executive here at our Piraeus office, will guide us through the intricacies of the EU emissions trading system, aka EU ETS. With 2025 marking a key transition year as coverage expands and compliance costs escalate, Mariana will help us understand not only the legal framework, but also the practical implications for owners, managers, and charters alike. Then we will welcome Mr. Peter McNamee, partner at Preston Turnbull, who will bring clarity to a major development, the Fuel EU Maritime Regulation coming into force this January and building upon the EU ETS. Peter will explain how owners and charters can prepare for this ambitious reduction trajectory and how contractual frameworks such as BIMCO's Fuel EU clause can help owners and charters balance compliance responsibilities and associated costs, of course. And last but not least, our colleague, Dr. William Moore, Global Loss Prevention Director, will share his expertise on a topic that sits at the core of the American Club's claims handling ethos, the collection and preservation of perishable evidence, which is an essential element for effective claims management and the protection of our members' interests. In his presentation, he also introduces the club's latest guidance and tools, which are built to assist crew and operators in this area. And before we conclude our seminar, we will take a moment with our COO, Mr. Daniel Tadros, to honor acts of exceptional courage and seamanship for saving life at sea. But I will not reveal more right now, and I will let the moment speak for itself. Σας ευχαριστώ όλους θερμά που μας τιμάτε με την παρουσία σας. And we shall now start our presentations with Mr. Ralph Clammah.
Good afternoon, everyone. So this afternoon, I have the privilege to share about the world of cybersecurity in the maritime sector. And as the saying goes, or the next saying goes, it's the iceberg that no one sees coming. Before I start sharing more about cybersecurity, I do want to take a few moments to highlight and bring a special thank you to the American Club and the leadership to recognize the importance of cybersecurity, but also bringing this as a proactive approach for their members and share insights about cybersecurity. Today we're going to look at the challenges of the world we live in, the digital era we live in. We're going to look at why does this matter for you. We're going to look at some of the real-world attacks that happen. What are the lessons learned that we could take from that? We're going to look at the importance of cyber vessels and how important it is to secure your vessels as well. We're going to look at numbers, because numbers don't lie, and the lessons that we could take from that. We're going to look at the importance of cybersecurity and how it ties into the regulation landscape. And then I'm going to be sharing a few of the case studies and why do organizations more and more invest into cybersecurity. And then there's always the positive side of how can cybersecurity also help the industry as a whole to keep on innovating and progressing. We live in a world of digital. Everyone's connected, everyone's online. Today on the news you always hear cyber attacks that impact financial industry, impacts the medical and healthcare sector. You look at governments being hacked, private or public sectors being attacked. But the reality is the maritime sector and the shipping world is another threat. Regardless of what your industry is, cyber has to be taken seriously. And especially if we look at the maritime sector, it is considered as a critical infrastructure, meaning something that contributes and has an impact to potential citizens. Why does this matter for you? It's a number that you've probably seen or could relate heavily. 80 to 90% of global trades are handled by the maritime sector. This has a big impact on countries, on populations. However, there's also a 900% increase in cybersecurity breaches of OT. OT is operational technology, is what the equipments are on your vessels. What's interesting is AI. Everyone's hearing AI in different contexts, AI for marketing, AI for finance, but AI is also being used in cybersecurity. And now AI-powered attacks are becoming more and more sophisticated and are being used more and more. And then there is the emerging risk. Vessels, equipments, and the systems are being developed even more, being innovated, and therefore these are posing threats to many organizations. Again, why does this matter to you? Your business and ships are prime targets for criminals or government seeking disruption and profit. And these disruptions are causing chaos for you as running your business. It's causing disruption when it comes to logistics and getting from point A to point B. But if we look at profit, it has also financial impacts on you. Whether it's legal consequences, you have to pay the ransomware, or you have to pay for bringing everything up online again. This has a price to it. Now I'm going to go through a few real-world attacks that happened over the last couple of years. Some you may be aware, some you could relate to. And more importantly, what was the takeaway or what was the intent of this attack? Nigerian gangs. We see this quite often, and this is, in the world of cyber, quite simple. It's related to emails. Impersonating someone from the organization and being able to transfer funds and getting money transferred to other bank accounts, for example. This is unfortunately something that is continuously happening, and we're seeing it often. Next, everyone that heard about this, the NotPetya for Maersk, where it costs, the estimates are $300 million in damages. What was interesting about this case, and prior to starting Blacklight, I used to be in the world of Big Four and Deloitte, and they were actually one of the clients that I was working on. And what was interesting with them specifically was the approach they took to handle this. Instead of hiding everything and not being on the news, they took the other approach. They say, we are going to share what's happened to us so no one else goes through this. This was a big hit for the sector and the industry, and it had operational disruptions that I'm sure some of you might have even faced. When we look at ships, it's not only transporting goods, it could be also transporting passengers. And unfortunately, there's some that also happened related to the Carnival Corporation, where they have information of guests. And these guests, they have their private personal information, passports, and a lot of sensitive information. There was an attack that happened, actually several incidents that happened in their case, where hackers managed to get into the system, encrypt, meaning lock the data so no one could access it, but also be able to steal it. This stolen information of guests, you could imagine it could be used for different aspects. Hackers could be using it to start stealing credentials, stealing information, but also if a competitor of Carnival got their hands on the list of guests, they could also use it to go and attract these new clients. US Port and Retail. This attack was related to financial and employee data being exposed when it comes to stealing information, stealing data. So as you're seeing, there's different type of attacks, and the intent of these change from one to the other. It could be purely financial motivation. It could be also related to stealing data, or it could also be related to causing chaos. European ports. Over the last couple of months, they've been targeted by ransomware, whether it's Belgium, German, Netherlands. They were impacted by ransomware, and this causes, again, disruption. And when we say disruption, you could imagine your team and the employees not being able to work, anything that is related to clients not being able to be communicated or worked with, but also anything when it comes to disruption, it has also legal consequences. It has financial consequences, and it also has a brand impact to the organization. Another one was related to the Red Sea incident. This was related to GPS spoofing. And when we say GPS, you could imagine there's a lot of new tech that is being implemented on ships. And these are now being exposed to potential threats and cyber attacks. The Iranian vessel. Again, this one was by a specific hacker group that was attacking specifically the maritime sector. And for them, it was a question of disrupting the ship-port link. And I don't need to tell you the impact of that and how it could disrupt, again, your day-to-day operations. And lastly, the more recent one, which happened in the US, the DALI. It was not a cyber attack. But what people noticed is that they could simulate this, meaning now with new technologies and new equipment going on the vessels, hackers are thinking differently. They're thinking, can I simulate this? Can I generate this? And therefore, this is becoming more and more of a concern for many ship owners. Now I want to share also what are the top threats that faces your ships and your organizations. Port infrastructure vulnerability. It might not have a direct impact on you, but you have constant communications between your vessels and ports. And the reality is there's a lot of communication. When we say communication, you could imagine it could be as simple as email exchanges, but it could also sometimes be different equipment that be talking to each other. Phishing and social engineering. Unfortunately, this is very common. Phishing, everyone is becoming a victim of phishing. But what's scary about phishing nowadays is how AI is being used, AI is being used to create very sophisticated emails. where sometimes industry experts are also having a hard time differentiating. But the social engineering. Social engineering could be, I find the USB, I walk in, I pretend I lost or I'm not sure who this belongs to. Can you put it and just to see if it's mine? And through that, it could be an easy foot into your ecosystem. So social engineering could be through gathering data on the dark web and on the internet about you and start figuring out what you're doing. But it could be as simple as, here's a USB, can you see what it is? And next thing you know, your entire ecosystem is compromised. API abuse and fraud, these are a bit more for the advanced organizations that are using equipment that are interconnected, and there's some API, meaning some connections between one technology and another. These are always a loophole where attackers could also get into. IoT devices and legacy equipment that are poorly patched. So I'm going to split this into two. IoT, Internet of Things, you could imagine as whether it's on ships or even the equipments in the offices, printers, access cards, all these are devices that have a potential to get hacked. And what's interesting with devices that are legacy devices, older devices, they are prone to more vulnerabilities and more attacks. And reality is, in the world, in the maritime sector, it's not the pioneer when it comes to cybersecurity. It's always the catch-up game. And unfortunately, this has a negative impact on the industry itself. Sorry. GPS spoofing and jamming is something we touched upon, where it's becoming more and more common. Technologies are being abused in the sense of taking advantage and getting a foot in the door into whether it's the organization or the vessel itself. And as we go along, I will be giving you more case studies of what does it mean on a vessel, what does it mean from onshore and the offices that are running this as well. Distribution, the denial of service, when everything goes offline, nothing works anymore. This becomes a big issue as well. Common threat. Shipboard system hacking. The network on your vessels are also exposed. And the reality is we're working with several clients in the maritime sector where their biggest concern is what happens on my vessel. And if anything that goes down, I'm in trouble. Data theft and insider threats. Data theft, meaning it could be your employees trying to steal information. Unfortunately, you might have employees that are disgruntled or not too happy, and what they would be doing is stealing information. However, that could also happen where your employee's information got stolen and someone's pretending to be that employee. And that's how they could also be stealing information. Ransomware attacks, you've heard this a lot of times, and unfortunately, many organizations are paying that ransom, but there's ways to whether to avoid it, but also, even if you pay the ransomware, doesn't mean you're going to get access to your data. But this is a very common one because they know certain industries, certain sectors are very cash friendly, and for them it's like, here's the money, just give me back my data. So they're going to take advantage of that. And the last one is around supply chain attacks, because you also are working with third parties, with other companies and other vendors, and that could be always an entry into your ecosystem. And the best example and the most recent one that you could imagine for supply chain is the hack that happened with Jaguar and Land Rover. That had an impact, and I think it's the most costly cyber attack that happened in the UK, and it was related to a supply chain attack. What does it mean? There was something related to a vendor that Jaguar works with. That's how they got into the ecosystem of Jaguar. Next thing you know, Jaguar for a month and a half wasn't able to produce one part. And this morning we're actually having that discussion where that has a consequence on everyone. And I'm going to take a few moments to share a bit about the impact of that attack for Jaguar and the rest of organizations. From Jaguar's standpoint, they are losing revenue, and big amounts of revenue. 2, the question mark was, what happens to their employees? How do they pay their employees? Their employees cannot go to work because there's no manufacturing. You can't build any pieces. 3, the vendors that Jaguar works with, they're not going to be able to provide their services to Jaguar. They're not getting money. That's a big risk for them. And 4, it's a question of, okay, Jaguar is not producing any pieces. Jaguar is not producing cars. Jaguar is not able to ship cars. So that has an impact on potentially anyone in the room here. So everything is related, and therefore the world of cyber is becoming more and more interesting and obviously targeted. And last thing around the hack of Jaguar, what's interesting is once an organization gets hacked, it makes the news, unfortunately. But from a hacker's point of view, they're going to collect all this data and they're going to sit on it. We're going to be seeing the consequences of that hack in potentially 3 months, 6 months, a year, where another attack is going to happen and people are not going to be able to link, oh, this is when Jaguar got hacked, they stole information, and they started a new attack. So the world of cyber continuously evolves, and you don't know what's the next big attack. Now we're going to look at cyber secure vessels is a necessity. Most common cyber incidents for vessels, malware. Someone sends you an email, someone clicks on that link or opens that PDF or Word, and next thing you know, there's a malware that happens. You might say, okay, but that happens just in my office that is offshore. But sometimes that email could be also forwarded or sent to the captain or anyone who's on the vessel. Next thing you know, that's another ecosystem. So this is one of the most common one we see. Human errors. We're all human. We all would be falling for that phishing link. Or we would always, in order to be that good person, plug in that USB, for example. And next thing you know, the attacker or the hacker got a foot in the door. Remote access. This is in the industry called where from offshore you want to, from onshore you want to connect to offshore or vice versa, where you're connecting remotely. And these are typical ways for hackers to get into the servers, the equipment, or anything on the vessels. And there's a lot, not a lot, 3% in the rest of different type of attacks. Now, how are these malwares being delivered? USB, which we mentioned, internet download, so anything that you open a browser to download a link, phishing by email, and a few other ways as well. But AI is creating a new risk for the maritime sector and globally for all. A few weeks ago, I was doing a presentation and they were asking me who's winning the race, the good guys or the bad guys. So us, we're using AI for good, but the reality is AI is also being used for bad. And it's a question of, it's a race. It's a race. I'm going to share a bit number, and I think this is going to relate a bit more with you. Less than 10% of OEM incorporates security by designs in new systems, leaving owners unaware and vulnerable to potential risk in their systems. Less than 32% of ship owners include cybersecurity in their new build teams. Some companies assign a cyber responsible, an IT person to look at it, but the reality is this person might not be the most knowledgeable when it comes to cybersecurity. Only 17% of shipyards have adequate in-house cybersecurity skill set. And these are the folks that are potentially constructing and building or designing these vessels. And 7% of vessel owners have paid a ransomware in the last 12 months. They probably took the easy route. Here's the money, just give me back my data, so I continue being online. Does anyone want to take a guess of what the average price of a ransomware payment has been? Any numbers to throw? 200? 200,000? 200? 200, a million? We're getting close.
10 million.
3.2 million. 3.2 million on average. They add up very quickly. Why? Because people get scared and they don't want to drag a problem for too long. Meaning, here's the money. It's going to take a hit. And people don't realize the consequence and the impact for the company. Meaning, 3.2 million is not inconsiderate. 2, some of them don't have cyber insurance. How do you cover that? 3, this is only for the ransom. The entire aspect of restoring, bringing back online, and all that also has a cost. And unfortunately, when a company is in crisis, they go on the market, hire all these different cyber responders and all that are also costing them an arm and a leg. Does anyone want to take a guess for the average cost of a cyber attack?
10 million.
He's sticking to 10 million.
That's the right figure.
550,000. The cost of the incident. Yes, you're expecting the millions, but let me put another lens to it. This is where it wasn't a ransomware. This is where the company had to figure out and pay external cybersecurity companies to come and help. This is what it costs to get new security tools and pay list price just because I need this security tool. This is the cost that they had to engage other companies to come and help. The reality is, proactive cybersecurity will save your business, but it will also save you money. Meaning you could have put a fraction of that amount in terms of investing in security tools and avoided that 550 potentially, or even worse, that 3.2 million. And that's why what I want to make sure I share today is if you take early steps into your cybersecurity journey, it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. On the contrary, it could save you millions, but also could save you your business. We deal with anywhere from SMEs to tier 1 clients, and some organizations that get a cyber attack, unfortunately, it could make them bankrupt, or it could make them in very deep trouble. Oops, sorry. Now let's look at it from another lens. Why is cybersecurity important when it comes to regulations? The world is evolving, and regulations are evolving very quickly. Whether it's specific to your industry or across all industries, the regulations are changing and evolving very quickly. Whether you're out of the US, UK, Europe, or even Asia, organizations are becoming more regulated. And we have a few examples around the IMO, where they're encouraging and insisting to have cybersecurity part of the regular checks, assessments, and exercises. When we look at the US, more recently, I think in July, they did the announcement of having cybersecurity personnel and experts assigned to their roles in order to also train staff and do a lot of proactive approach to putting cybersecurity in place. And also in the European Union, there was directives in order to make sure cybersecurity is part of their operations. This is going to continuously evolve. There's going to be more and more regulations. And the reality is only maybe 10 to 20% of the IT budget is allocated to cyber tools. And this is minimal. This is nothing. Therefore, this leaves a big gap and leaves organizations exposed. Now, the other aspect, and I'm going to tie it back to the cyber insurance, is you might be exploring cyber insurance. And nowadays we work with different insurance and brokers where they would be going and seeing the client. They would ask them, do you have this cybersecurity control in place? Do you have that control in place? And if they start answering no, 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 you could imagine premium is going to be extremely high. Next, if the client says, no, I have this control, I have that control, I have this in place when it comes to cybersecurity, their premium is going to be lower. So there's always an upside in terms of your cyber investment. It's not just to tick the box from a regulation perspective, not only to get that cyber insurance, but also to minimize the potential impact it could have on your organization. And that's where we come into play of how do we help organizations be secure, but more importantly, be proactive when it comes to cybersecurity. It's all a question of being proactive. Similar to a message earlier where proactive approach of identifying what are the next regulations that could impact your industry or your organizations. We look at organizations and help organizations be proactive in terms of monitoring, detecting, and responding to an attack. Sharing a bit of the mission and goals of the world of cyber, and then I'm going to also start sharing a few case studies of how does it impact you and what could it look like in your organization. The reality is securing critical infrastructure. When I say critical infrastructure is what is something essential for your business to run. It could be your vessels, it could be a certain set of data, it could be anything depending on the nature of your business. The other aspect we help organizations is being efficient when it comes to responding to an attack. Because majority of you in the room might not know who to call in case there's an attack, or what do I do? So that's an aspect of helping when it comes to incident response to minimize that time of exposure. The other aspect is how do you automate? Because maybe today you're not in a position to hire a team of 10 people to look at cybersecurity, which in my opinion you should not either. There's a lot of tools that have automation, that have AI, that could help you be more effective and more efficient. How do we use AI to detect threats? Because like I said, AI is being used for bad, and it's a question of keeping up. Therefore, you have to use AI against AI to be able to identify and detect threats. And the last aspect is, what are the different preventative measures that you could put in place to avoid and minimize your risk exposure? Some of these aspects you might have currently in place, and I do want to share a bit of the case studies of how all this speaks to each other. Meaning, everyone is probably either using Office 365 or G Suite when it comes to your day-to-day operations. You might have firewalls that are in place, whether it's in your offices or on your vessels. You might have an antivirus running, and probably that's the majority of the security tools you have in place. That is a small aspect of what you could do in the world of cyber. But what we embarked into a journey is how can we make the most out of just these three data sources? And I'll give you the example of how we helped an organization that they were in the hospitality group. They have a lot of guests. And we were able to detect where one of their employees started downloading a lot of information and accessing files that they should not have access to. And in your case, you could imagine someone that is part maybe of the HR team or marketing team or any other team start accessing files that are related to finance or the list of all your clients. And they all of a sudden take this and send it from their corporate email to a Gmail account. Someone's trying to steal information. Or they start uploading it on Dropbox or on Box. Or even more, they might have that very paranoid view of, okay, I'm not going to send an email, someone might be looking at me. I'm going to send it to the printer. So how can you also detect if someone's printing a lot and stealing information internally? So I'm sharing this example to make it a bit more relevant that cyber is not only for your vessels, but also for your day-to-day operations. The reality is there's different type of attacks that we're seeing more and more, whether it's employees trying to steal information, or the other aspect is someone from outside trying to poke and figure out how to get into your network. And you could imagine cybersecurity, same analogy as a house. And if this house has a door, does this house have a door and a lock? Does this house have a door, a lock, and a camera? And that's how the principles follow. Another interesting aspect is the hardware and physical security. So this is a bit more tied to the vessels. You have hardware, you have equipment, and these are another exposure aspect. And this is where we tie it back to the power of our software of being able to correlate all these and find these threats. Now, I started off with the industry numbers that are scary, but the reality is cyber could not only save you money, save your business, but also have a positive impact to the industry itself. One, making sure that there's no operational disruption, meaning your business is running and you're able to contribute back to the economy. A lot of topics are now involving more and more ESG, and it's a question of how does cyber fit into ESG? When it comes to ESG, there's the environmental, social, and the governance. And part of the governance is, am I tracking cyber as a risk? Am I looking at the equipment on my vessels? Am I securing that? It could also enhance the overall safety of crew. It looks at strengthening the regulatory landscape and being more compliant. And it helps overall with global trades and resilience. Excellent, because I was the key takeaways and we're done. So just quickly, the world of cyber is becoming more and more sophisticated with the AI. So it's a question of being smart when it comes to budgeting and using a selection of tools. It's looking at prioritizing when it comes to training the teams, but also partnering with key experts in the industry to make sure that you don't make the news for a cyber breach, but rather make the news for being an innovator in the world of the maritime sector. On that note, I thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you. So can you hear me? Yes, you can. Can you see me? Now you can. Hi. So thank you for being here with us this evening. Welcome, everyone. I will be speaking to you about the European Union Emissions Trading System, EU ETS for short. I will be addressing some risks faced by the parties involved in the contract of carriage, not only legal but also financial and commercial. And we will be addressing some key contractual considerations that the parties may be looking at when seeking to agree EU ETS clauses in the context of time charters, voyage charters, and if time allows, Bill, ship management agreements. I promise not to take more than 20-ish minutes, but Bill will keep me on track. Thank you. All right, so you know all about EU ETS by now, but I'll start with a brief overview to warm up a bit. So since 2018, the ships that have been calling ports in the European Economic Area had to monitor, report, and verify the greenhouse gas emissions under the so-called MRV regulation. MRV regulation has been supplemented by the EU ETS regulation, which is a market-based cap-and-trade system mandatory to all the shipping companies. What the EU ETS regulation does is it obliges shipping companies, after having verified the greenhouse gas emissions produced, to now surrender to the European Union the so-called European Union allowances, or EUAs for short, or just allowances, that correspond to the emissions already verified. This needs to be done on an annual basis. So the currency of the EU ETS is the EUAs, the allowances. It's a financially regulated product that can be purchased by the interested parties either in primary market, which is basically auctions arranged by member states of the European Union, or at the secondary market, which is in trading platforms like stock exchange-like trading platforms. The EUAs have to be surrendered to the administering authorities, basically EU member states, that have been allocated to each shipping company in advance. It is important to keep the timeline of key obligations of a shipping company in mind. So each shipping company has to monitor and report the ship's emissions for a full calendar year. This is the verification period, the reporting period. The year following the reporting period is the verification period, during which a shipping company has to prepare an emissions report by the 31st of January of that year, on the basis of which report the shipping company has to get the emissions verified by an accredited official verifier. This needs to be done by the 31st of March. Followingly, on the basis of the verified emissions, on the basis of the verification report, the shipping company has to surrender to the EU member state, to the administering authority, allowances that correspond to the verified emissions. So per 1 ton of carbon dioxide emission, 1 allowance has to be surrendered to the authorities. And this has to be repeated annually. Until now, so the EU ETS started applying to the shipping industry since 1st of January 2024, and for the years 2024 and 2025, the surrender obligation applied only to the carbon dioxide emissions as verified, but starting 2026, the surrender obligation will also apply to the verified nitrous oxide and methane emissions. The EU ETS regulation also included a phase-in period on the percentage of the emissions that have a corresponding surrender obligation, which will be increased to 100% for the year 2026. So as you appreciate, the year 2026 will be a hot year when it comes to EU ETS, as the overall cost for the shipping companies is likely to increase. And when the costs increase, things get hot. So, according to the EU ETS regulation, the default compliance entity is the shipping company, which is defined as the registered ship owner. Now, the EU ETS regulation does give the right to a shipping company to transfer the overall compliance responsibility, including the responsibility to surrender the allowances, to either a bareboat charterer or to a third-party management company that has assumed responsibilities under the ISM code, so the dock holder, essentially. Another important thing about the EU ETS regulation is it obliges the EU member states to implement laws and measures on a national level so that the shipping company can then seek reimbursement for the EU ETS costs from a third-party company, which company has undertaken, pursuant to a contract, to provide fuel to the ship. It's the principle the polluter pays, or a company operating the ship. So this is either the time charterer, or under circumstances could be also the voyage charterer. However, this statutory right, although it's a positive right for the shipping companies, it should be treated with caution. First of all, because the compliance entity vis-à-vis the authorities remains the shipping company. It's only a right of reimbursement that it's created there, indirect right of reimbursement. And secondly, the enforcement of such right for a shipping company may be quite challenging, as it will have to go through national laws, national measures. The law property will most likely apply to the allowances. So as you appreciate, given that different EU member states are involved in the EU ETS, it can be challenging for a shipping company to have this right enforced. So if a ship owner wants to have a clearer, more efficient means to seek reimbursement from a time charterer or a voyage charterer, it is preferable that this is regulated contractually by agreeing EU ETS clauses. And we will be looking at this in a bit. So starting with charters, so basically the EU ETS imposes a cost on the parties. And as with any cost, the parties will be looking to allocate this cost contractually. BIMCO has published the BIMCO Emissions Trading Scheme Allowances Clause for Time Charter Parties 2022, or BIMCO ETS for short. This is a clause widely used by the parties, and we've seen many variations depending on the commercial preferences or trading requirements. One important thing to remember about the BIMCO ETS clause is that it is drafted in a way, it's generally worded, so it covers all emission schemes, not just the EU ETS. And we tend to see parties amending the title or the wording of the clause to read BIMCO EU ETS, which restricts its application only to the European Union ETS. The general wording of the clause is particularly beneficial to owners, as in the future years, more emission schemes are expected to come into place in countries outside the European Union. So especially in time charters spanning over years and years, it is beneficial to owners to have the BIMCO clause to cover all emission schemes, not just the EU ETS. One key consideration in the context of time charter is the frequency with which the owners will receive the EUAs from charterers, as this is linked with the counterparty credit risk. The BIMCO ETS clause does provide for a monthly transfer of EUAs based on SIPS data. It's important to remember that it's based on SIPS data, but we will be coming to it in a second. Now, the parties tend to agree shorter or longer transfer periods. Usually, charterers will prefer longer transfer periods to avoid having to deal with the administrative burden of EUAs on a regular basis, or to manage their own counterparty credit risk. However, longer transfer periods can be more risky for owners, as in case of charterer's default, then the owners will have to enforce larger damages claim, which will have been built over a period of a year or half a year or 6 months, depending on the amendment. And we must remember that despite the contractual allocation, the ship owners remain liable vis-à-vis the authorities for the surrendering of EUAs. So if charterers are in default of their obligations to transfer EUAs, the owners will still need to go out the market and purchase the EUAs themselves to surrender to the authorities. So depending on when the owners go out the market to make this purchase, they may be exposed to higher EUAs prices, especially if the default of charterers is close to the surrender deadline, which is the 30th of September. And close to that deadline, the prices of the EUAs tend to spike. One way for owners to mitigate this risk is to adopt hedging strategies, so essentially buying EUAs, having enough in their reserves to cover potential charterers' default. Nevertheless, contractual regulation of this risk is also preferable sometimes. Now, we've seen the parties agreeing on EUA transfer on a per voyage basis, which is again preferred by charterers, especially when they want to have the ability to pass down the cost to voyage subcharterers. Now, this is fine. However, the definition of the voyage does not easily lend itself to the concept of a time charter. So what the parties need to keep in mind is that if they agree the transfer on a voyage basis, to include in the BIMCO ETS clause clear wording to define what voyage constitutes for the purpose of calculation of EUAs to avoid potential disputes. Right, so another important thing about the BIMCO ETS clause is that it refers to ships' data. So the EUAs are transferred, reconciled, calculated on the basis of ships' data, not on verified data. And we've seen cases where the data verified are different from the data reported on board the ships because of the existence of some correction factors. Now, at the same time, the parties will want to transfer or receive the exact amount of EUAs that will need to be surrendered by the owner to the authorities, not less, not more than that. The exact amount of EUAs is, however, determined not before the 31st of March of each year, and by that time, the time charter might well be terminated. So, to avoid potential disputes on that front, the parties may agree alternative reconciliation regimes on the basis of verified data. And there are in the market accredited third-party verifiers who can do official verifications on regular intervals during the currency of the charter party. Or the parties may include a clause providing for reconciliation of the EUAs on the basis of verified data once these are available. Now, when it comes to the pricing of EUAs, the BIMCO clause provides for transfer of allowances. However, the parties may agree to deal in cash, in which case the owners will need to purchase the EUAs themselves and then charge the cost to the charterers. Again, this increases the risk for owners, as in case of charterers' default, they will be exposed to the EUA's price fluctuations. Another important thing of dealing with cash option is the timing of the purchase and the price of the purchase, as we've seen arguments from charter side as to the reasonableness of the price at which the EUAs have been purchased. So, the parties may want to consider, first of all, clear wording to deal in cash instead of EUAs, as the BIMCO ETS clause does not provide for the cash option, is EUAs only. And they may want to amend the BIMCO ETS clause to include a price benchmark or a price date for the EUAs to be purchased by the owners. During the off-hire periods, the EUAs, according to the BIMCO ETS clause, are for the owner's account. The charters have the right then to deduct EUAs for the off-hire periods, and the owners are obliged to transfer back to charterers what they have already remitted. The owners may want to qualify this clause and make reference to specific off-hire clauses or specific off-hire events. Importantly, if the parties elect to deal in cash, the owners may want to include a provision that the charterers do not have the right to deduct hire for EUAs incurred during the off-hire periods. Right, so in case of charter's default, under the BIMCO ETS clause, the owners have the right to suspend the performance of the charter party. This is quite an important protection for owners. We see that charters tend to exclude this provision from the BIMCO ETS clause. Even if this provision is excluded, the owners still have a right to claim damages and/or indemnity for the losses suffered for outstanding EUAs under the general indemnity principle of the charter party. Depending on the wording, we've seen owners trying to enforce a lien for EUAs outstanding. However, this will depend on the wording being wide enough to cover monies due under the charter party, especially when the EUAs are dealt in cash. Voyage charters. In voyage charters, the risk is significantly less comparing to time charters, as the emissions liability is for a designated voyage and for a foreseeable period of time. So the key consideration for owners is how to price the EUAs, for what period, and the timing of the payment from charterers. Now, BIMCO has produced 3 clauses with 3 different payment options: transfer of EUAs equivalent to voyage emissions, payment of a cash equivalent sum on top of freight is the BIMCO surcharge clause, and a lump sum included in freight. Now, the BIMCO surcharge clause has some further considerations that the parties should keep in mind, especially owners. The clause provides that the EUA surcharge will be made upfront as an agreed figure, and it only allows for an adjustment in case of EUA's price fluctuations. So it does not cover excess emissions due to unpredictable events such as heavy weather, voyage adjustments, contractual rerouting, demurrage, or detention that could significantly impact the emissions. So the owners will need to consider if it is appropriate to include the right to adjust the surcharge not only in case of change in the price of EUAs, but also in case of change in the circumstances, unpredictable events that could cause excessive emissions. One way of achieving that would be for owners to agree an additional provision as a standalone adjustment, payable potentially with demurrage, to cover for unexpected events. The timing of the payment is equally important, and the owners would want the payment of any EUAs to be made before the arrival at disport or the completion of discharge for obvious enforcement possibilities. Right, so as we mentioned previously, the EU ETS gives the right to owners to transfer the overall compliance responsibility to a third-party management company. This increases significantly the risk of a ship management agreement, as the managers assume more regulatory and financial responsibility on behalf of the owners. The management company now becomes liable for surrendering of the EUAs. These EUAs, the managers will have to obtain from the owners, and most likely the owners will have to obtain these EUAs from the charterers. So a third-party management company, one could say, is exposed to a double risk of 2 parties going in default instead of 1. So the counterparty risk is a key consideration here as well. The managers will want to ensure that the EUAs are transferred to them in advance, based on forecasted emissions, and subject to reconciliation. The managers may also consider obtaining upfront security from owners or ongoing top-up obligations to cover any sudden change in the circumstances of owners or in case of owners' default. Both parties will likely require a reconciliation of the EUAs once the emissions are verified. Both parties may also want express termination rights, and this is very important for managers in case the owners fail to transfer the EUAs so that they can limit their exposure the quickest possible. BIMCO has published the Shipment Emissions Trading Scheme Allowances Clause 2023, which addresses most of these issues. So we're reaching the end. The disputes that we have seen so far relate to either charterers' default in remitting EUAs as a result of their failure to open trading accounts, or as a result of their unwillingness to deal in EUAs, although they've agreed to deal in EUAs. We've seen disputes because of misunderstandings or lack of clarity as to how the emissions are calculated, and disputes because of the uncertainty as to when the charterer's responsibility kicks in on the commencement of the charter. The vast majority of these disputes are resolved amicably. However, as we mentioned before, 2026 will be a breeding year for disputes due to the likely overall increase in costs. Apart from the EU ETS, in 2026, the liability for the Fuel EU costs will kick in. Peter will be talking to you about the Fuel EU. So EU ETS is a matter that we monitor closely, and depending on the developments, in our next loss prevention seminar, we might be telling you more about it. Thank you very much.
Can everybody hear me? Perfect. Thanks very much, Mariana, for the excellent talk there on EU ETS, and thank you very much to the American Club for inviting me here today. I apologise to start off with. I've got a really sore throat and I'm struggling with my voice, so please bear with me. I will shout up as loud as I can through the microphone, but if anyone can't hear me, do shout, and I will try and deliver the slides in sign language or interpretive dance as you prefer. So today I'm just going to run you through Fuel EU. I appreciate the bar is waiting downstairs and everybody's keen for a drink, so I'm going to try and rattle through it as quickly and informatively as I can. I appreciate it is quite a dry and difficult subject, but do bear with me, and if anybody wants to shout up with any questions as we go, please do shout. So what I'm going to cover is just a little starting point of how we got here with Fuel EU. Why have we got this in place? Then I'm going to look at how Fuel EU works. Look at the compliance elements to it, and then look at the BIMCO Time Charter Parties clause. And then finally, I'm going to crystal ball gaze and tell everybody what fuel they need to do, what they need to do with their vessels, and how they're going to comply with Fuel EU. So starting off then of how we got here with Fuel EU, Mariana's touched on EU ETS, but more holistically, we've got to look at shipping and its effect on the global carbon emissions. It accounts for around 3%. This is a figure produced by IMO. So it's clearly a significant impactor on global carbon emissions. As you all know, there is, from the Paris Accord, there are global emissions targets, and specifically the IMO has adopted those and has agreed to reduce emissions by 40% by 2030, with an aim of net zero by 2050. The EU has adopted slightly more ambitious targets. They're looking at 55% by 2030 for carbon reduction and a net zero by 2050. So Fuel EU is obviously not in a vacuum. It's surrounded by several other regulations that have come into play from various international organisations. 1st of January 2020, I'm sure you all remember IMO 2020, which brought about the implications for use of VLSFO. That obviously had really wide-ranging impacts to all ship owners, and similarly, we anticipate that Fuel EU is going to be similarly impactful. 1st of November 22, we had MARPOL introducing the EEXI and CII indicators, relatively soft obligations and soft targets set within that. But now we look towards EU ETS and Fuel EU, which have really started to grow teeth. The changes to EU ETS, as Mariana has brilliantly just gone through from the 1st of January 24, has really added teeth to the EU's targeting of the carbon emissions of the maritime sector. And similarly, Fuel EU Maritime is going to have a similarly big impact. So what is it? Well, principally, it's an EU regulation. It came into force on the 1st of January, and its simple aim is to encourage the use of renewables and low-carbon fuels. As I mentioned, we've got that goal from the EU of a 55% reduction of greenhouse gases. But it's completely agnostic as to what fuel you should be using and what technologies the ships should adopt. It is very much, as we've seen with various other regulations recently in global politics, such as international sanctions, the obligation and the onus is very much on the ship owners and operators. So, the intergovernmental organisations are not providing us with any clear solutions as to what we have to do. It is incumbent on the shipping industry to find those solutions. Frankly, it is an enormous and difficult task for all ship owners and operators, and you have my every sympathy in trying to comply with it. In terms of the scope of it, what are we talking about here? Well, we're principally talking about vessels over 5,000 GT. And as I touched on, the intention of it is to have extraterritorial effect. So even if you are not flagged in the EU, even if you are not an EU company, it is more interested in the energy that flows from your vessel. That's how you will be targeted. So 100% of the energy of ships travelling on an EU, within the EU area, so an EU to EU voyage is caught. So all of the carbon emissions from that voyage have to be recorded. Similarly, 50% of voyages from non-EU places to EU ports, or vice versa, is caught. And then finally, 100% of the energy used at berths. This is an evolving area where increasingly the intention from the European Union is to see ports and terminals operating a more environmentally friendly environment that allows ships to use shore power from renewable sources without having to emit carbon through effectively the burning of gas oil and LSFO. So what is it? No, I apologise that I'm a lawyer, not a chemist, so I'm not going to go through and explain what carbon emissions are, what they look like, and how they apply, because frankly, I don't know. But these are the targets. You'll see that there are relatively modest targets, as I understand it, to start off with, and there's a gradual ramping down, as it were, in terms of the carbon emissions. And we're looking here at greenhouse emissions as defined in greenhouse gas intensity, as defined by the regulations. But you see there's a gradual decrease. So 2025, we're looking for a 2% decrease, 2030, 6%, and so on and so forth. You can all see the slide. So you can see how the intention is by 2050 to effectively get near to a net zero position. So how do you comply? Again, I'm conscious that everybody's keen to get out of the room before midnight. So I'm going to kind of keep it short and sweet because it's a complete impossible task, and I can't give you an answer. But I can at least give you the roadmap of what you should be doing in terms of monitoring plans and the deadlines, and they're set out here. So hopefully all of you owners and operators in the room now have your Fuel EU monitoring plan in place. And that is essentially how we are monitoring the greenhouse gas emissions coming from the vessels. From the 1st of Jan, that monitoring plan must be in place to collect the data. So that should be in operation now. Then the 31st of January 2026 is when it starts to get really exciting in the world of Fuel EU. We have to start submitting those first reports. How much greenhouse gases has that vessel been emitting? And it has to be verified by an independent verifier. Now, that's the independent verifiers area has been a sort of source of concern for many as to how that would work. Who are these independent verifiers? Do they know what they're doing? How well equipped are they? But now we've seen that many classification societies are now listing out approved independent verifiers. So the hope is that the quality will be there with those independent verifiers. There will be a proper market for owners to employ independent verifiers and have a good choice in that respect. Then moving forward, on the 31st of March 2026, we'll have the verification of the Fuel EU report within the Fuel EU database. So this is the process of having had your report submitted and verified by the independent verifier. It then gets uploaded to the Fuel EU database. And then on the 30th of June 2026, the document of compliance must be issued. So essentially, all of the steps here are the starting out of the plan, the recording of the emissions, getting those emissions verified, and getting it into the system. And that then gives the European Union and the individual member states the opportunity to start enforcement of the regulations. So I mentioned earlier, obviously, the caps for greenhouse gas emissions for owners year on year. And there are various methods of which they can manage that compliance. You can use banking. This is effectively where you bank a surplus from a previous year. Now, the anticipation is that with the slightly more modest greenhouse gas targets in the first year, you're going to have the ability to use that any surplus that you manage to generate in that first year and carry it forward to the next year. Similarly, you can effectively do the opposite, which is referred to as borrowing in the regulations, which allows you to use 2% of next year's emissions. So if you have a particularly bad year, you can use 2% of next year's emissions to effectively allow that for compliance this year. But there is a bit of a sting in the tail with that, because you effectively have a penalty of 1.1 of the times the borrowed unit. So it effectively works out as a 10% reduction in that 2% that you've used. So I suspect many will look at the borrowing aspect as a fairly last resort, because if you imagine with the targets reducing year on year, you're going to put yourself under increasing pressure if you've got an excess. The next year, the difference and the gap you're going to have to plug is going to be quite difficult, and it might affect the trading capabilities of the vessels. The other element is pooling, and this allows you effectively to pool your greenhouse gas emissions across a fleet. This is obviously of great advantage to larger ship owners with a bigger fleet. And I do see that is going to result in some significant competitive advantages in the market for owners that have those larger fleets. And as ever with these kind of regulations, for the smaller owners with fewer vessels, not only is the compliance regime complicated, the methods for reduction of greenhouse gases, as we'll come on to later, they're extremely difficult. It's high technology that is unproven. So for the smaller owners, it is going to be extremely difficult. We can make no bones about that. And pooling is only going to benefit the bigger guys. And then finally, as I say there, the penalties for multiple years of non-compliance are designed to ramp up. So if you have multiple years of non-compliance, the fines that will be levied get increased by 10% year on year. Now, I just wanted to touch on the BIMCO time charter parties clause. hopefully many of you are already relatively familiar with it, and I don't propose kind of reading it line by line, because I'm sure I'll have many of you dropping off, falling asleep. So, but I just wanted to give you a kind of rough overview of how it operates. Now, of course, the BIMCO clause is not the only clause. I know Intertanko have released a clause, as have others. To be fair to the charterers in the room, I've put up the BIMCO clause because it generally strikes the fairest balance. BIMCO members and documentary committees are largely built up of a broad spectrum of representatives from the maritime sector. So it does generally strike a relatively fair balance, although I'm sure plenty in the chartering departments of owners will tell me differently. But essentially, Clause A there is just designed at highlighting that the parties will comply with FuelEU Maritime, and that information will flow from the owners for the reporting periods. It's a fairly loose general obligation. Subclause B is then looking at the monitoring plan, and essentially it's ensuring that owners have a monitoring plan in place, and it needs to record the greenhouse gas intensities and ensure that they're monitored throughout. That, of course, creates another obvious obligation on owners in regards to the management of the vessel. So, you know, it's as you look at the more general, broader obligations that owners have to exercise due diligence to ensure that the vessel is appropriately seaworthy. This is another such obligation on owners. Subclause C then deals with the obligation, giving the charterers the option to look at alternative fuels. It's a fairly general woolly obligation because it essentially says that charterers are allowed to use alternative fuels, providing that such fuels are dealt with in the specification of the vessel, and it deals with other obligations around bunker delivery notes, etc. So we're not quite into the meat of the clause yet, but moving on, we get onto subclause D, which is owner's obligation to notify the aggregate balance. One of the things that I've noticed in a few time charter parties recently is you might have a time charter for, say, 6 months, and you see that this clause isn't filled in. There is an option there. It is important that people take heed of the need to identify whether the reporting period is each month or each voyage, and also when implementing this clause and looking at the broader monitoring plan, it's really important that owners have a general think about the term of the time charter and the collection of that data. Moving on then to clause E, which deals with the calculating of any surcharge. So the surcharge is the excess of carbon against the targets and the extent to which that's applicable within the charter. And unsurprisingly, it identifies that any undisputed off-hire periods are excluded. It also excludes the effects of banking, borrowing and pooling decisions. Now, we've seen attempts by charterers to have this particular element removed as well. Number two, as charterers try to benefit from owners' pooling obligations. Again, whilst trying to be fair to both owners and charterers, I would generally advise against this because it becomes extremely complicated to decide how you might pool across a fleet. So if you're talking about a single time charter, maybe you've got a fleet of 50 vessels. The pooling arrangements are complicated, and to try and mess with them in a single time charter is not a good idea. So hence the drafting is designed to remove that from the calculating of any surcharge. Then Limb 3 deals with the negative effects of having a negative compliance balance for multiple periods that I mentioned earlier. And then Clause F basically says that the charterers pay the surcharge. So, just boiling it down to its most simplest point, the whole idea of the BIMCO time charter party clause is that the obligation falls to charterers to pay the surcharge. Owners do the monitoring, charterers do the surcharge. it'd be interesting to see how this might impact a longer-term time charter. So if you have a 10-year time charter, and obviously there's requirements on owners to improve the efficiency over a period of time, okay, where there's small improvements required around the greenhouse gas emissions, that can largely be dealt with via trading patterns. But when you're talking over a longer period and you've got significant changes to make, the onus is slightly on charterers to see if there are alternative fuels, whereas the owner's obligations are relatively soft in that respect. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour through Fuel EU Maritime. Now I just wanted to touch on the sort of more technology side of it. And again, I repeat, I'm a lawyer and I'm not a naval architect nor engineer. But I've at least tried to get some photos in this slide to ensure that it's not all text and me droning on about regulations. But you start to see how some of the bigger players are looking to develop new technologies, new ship types. And you can, we can have a debate over a drink later, but you can see that there are going to be pros and cons of what are quite drastic changes in propulsion systems within ships. So some of the more kind of out there options are things like wind, things like battery technology, things like even nuclear technology, so small nuclear plants on vessels, or wholesale conversion to LNG. Extremely complicated, extremely difficult. And, we're talking you can see the MOL image on the LNG carrier there. On the LNG vessel. It's a car carrier. It's Maersk, it's MSC. It is the larger players that are looking at these technologies. They are investing hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, in these new technologies. This is beyond the reach of the average ship owner. They are just simply not going to be at the vanguard of new technologies. So how else are they going to deal with it? So it's a quandary. Do we start to look at alternative fuels? I've listed just a few there. All of them have their pros and cons. The most fundamental con to all of these is an infrastructure one. We all know where to get bunkers. Does anybody know where we're going to get a supply of hydrogen from, a supply of methanol? How are synthetic fuels going to actually work in practice in terms of speed and performance requirements? And what are the emissions from all of these going to be? Sadly to say, the obligation is going to sit with the maritime industry to resolve it. The regulators do not offer us up a solution. So, what do we see? The reality is, I do think it will be the giants that will test and they will come up with the solutions for the market. Obviously, then that's going to have to filter through to the yards for whether that's retrospective refits of vessels for alternative propulsion systems, alternative fuels, etc. But for now, it is going to be steady changes, steady improvements, slight changes in the ways in which vessels operate, improvements to the efficiencies. We've seen already things like scrubbers and burners trying to reduce carbon impacts of vessels. So it is really going to be about mitigation measures of existing fuels. But yeah, the major takeaway from Fuel EU is it is here. It is relevant for every owner. It is going to be extremely difficult to comply with. It's going to be full of lots of difficult and interesting questions for a lawyer. Gladly for me, at least, it's going to be fertile ground for disputes between owners and charterers. So I thank you all in advance. But in all seriousness, it is a real challenge for the maritime sector. But going back to that first slide, going back to the carbon goals set out by the Paris Accord and other international organisations, net zero is a real target, and it's a target that most organisations are aiming towards. So it is not something we can all bury our head in the sand about. We are going to have to see changes, and we're going to have to engage with Fuel EU. And it is going to be difficult in the short term. But thank you, everybody, for your attention today, and look forward to speaking with you all afterwards.
Everybody, glad to see so many familiar faces and a few new faces. And all I can start with after what I've heard today from Ralph and Mariana and Peter, it's messy out there. Everything on the fuel, cybersecurity, there's a lot of those things linked together. I'm a naval architect, and as an engineer, we engineers don't like two things. We don't like people, and we don't like uncertainty. And that encompasses everything that is associated with uncertainty and people. But that aside, today I just want to talk to you about, I know that everybody's getting thirsty and probably a little hungry too. So I'd just like to wrap up before we give Dan Tadros an opportunity to present some awards important to us also. That's part of our loss prevention initiatives and bravery and hero awards. So, but before we get to that, I just wanted to introduce to you, we have just released yesterday the English version of a new guidance document that we put out on perishable evidence. Collection of perishable evidence is the name of the document. I just wanted to note, this is not something which is unique. It is not something which is new. We are all familiar with the ISM code. We're all familiar with the requirements of the ISM code. Collection of evidence, near-miss reporting, all the things. There's always the challenges associated with that. As you know, with the American Club, we've been doing a lot of work on an initiative called Good Catch, which we try to focus more attention on near misses and things that were caught before they became issues. But just as importantly is the collection of evidence as it relates to incidents and accidents that occur on board ship. And that collection of that information, how it's being collected, what's being collected, are vitally important, particularly when it comes to the claims and handling of the claims component of it. And I would like to also note that our new guidance is directed towards crews. It focuses on perishable evidence, which I'll define in a moment. And it also considers recommendations both for what ship owners should consider with regard to how collection of evidence is reflected in their safety management system, but also some guidance with regard to possible checklists, short checklists associated with the work. But I would also like to note this was not a one-man or a one-person initiative. There was input on this document from the CEO on down. Dorothea Joanna, who's sitting here in the corner, from her to Dan to Joanna. There were a lot of people who actually input into this document, which made me feel better that everybody was very comfortable with what we actually put together, given the broad breadth of experience that everyone actually has in the organization. Incidents and evidence. Incident investigations, of course, are imperative. They're imperative for compliance with the ISM code and safety, but also, in particular, as you all well know, very much associated with handling and facilitating the claims process. So collecting that evidence, of course, is a fundamental component of that. Now, other organizations north of England has put out some very good documents. They actually wrote the most significant, as far as P&I clubs, information on or guidance on collection of evidence. But what we wanted to do, we always do something, we might do something which is similar, but we always try to give a little twist to what we do. It's just not exactly the same thing. So what we did was to focus our attention on what we term as perishable evidence. Sorry, I could speak loud enough without that right in my face. And perishable evidence is focused on what is the information that needs to be collected right then and there that basically may be difficult to recover or recreate at a later date. Thank you. So what's most critical? There's a lot of documentation which can be gotten off the ship, should the ship not have been directly affected, or from the office. But what's most importantly, we try to focus on is what's important right then, right there, and after the incident occurs. Excuse me. As we know, I would like to just make a couple comments about witness statements. This created quite a conversation internally. Witness statements, of course, are highly valuable, or can be highly valuable, of little or no use, and also can be damaging. Okay, and one of the things that we think is important, of course, is accuracy is imperative. Just the facts, not conjecture, of course. Taking witness statements must be compliant with the safety management system, and careful consideration of the safety management system should be taken, considering should legal counsel be present. Some jurisdictions that might be a little bit more critical, maybe than other jurisdictions, but what we are recommending in particular in our guidance is that significant emphasis should be paid to, if witness statements are to be taken, legal representation, it's always better to actually have it than not have it, but still it should be considered in conjunction with the safety management system, which will have its own set of requirements, and should the set of requirements need to be, should the procedures within the safety management system need to be adjusted, we should do so. And we highly recommend, if you have issues with this or concerns about that, please consult the club. And if you have an incident, of course, consult the club about whether we should be recommending that legal counsel should be present when taking witness statements. That, of course, creates an issue with the time period and getting these things done in a proper, timely fashion. But again, it's vitally important that these things are considered, and we highly recommend that. Most important, to create a record, that's, of course, important for us to assist you in handling the claims. Description of the evidence which is secured, who took custody of it. That's extremely important. Again, something to consider within the safety management system. When and where the evidence was secured, and when it's turned over to a third party, who are you actually turning it over to? Are they the right person to be turning that information over to? And how that's actually done is vitally important. Again, creating that record in the process. So we focused our attention particularly on certain P&I events and associated events leading to a P&I incident, particularly with our checklist. There's collision, grounding, damage to third-party property, what I like to term as contact damage-related incidents. Injury, of course, extremely important. Cargo damage, heavy weather-related issues, structural equipment, machinery, damage failures, which also have an impact upon P&I, fire and explosion, pollution, and also stowaways. So we started with that. We thought we'd keep it concise, and we hope that the checklist that we've prepared, again, focus very much on the most perishable evidence, will be beneficial for your consideration. I wasn't going to go into any detail about any type of evidence that should be collected, but boy, everybody keeps telling me that VDR data, hitting that record button, making sure that record button is hit right away. I was told I must emphasize this to everybody, because making sure that hitting that button and hitting the right button is an important element. Again, I didn't want to go into all the grounding, collision, damage to third-party property type of events, but I was told to make sure I mentioned that, particularly as a reminder. And again, we emphasize that in the guidance. Photos. How many photos should you take? There's never too many photos that you can take. You could take too few photos. You could take too few photos from the right angle and the right size, close up, from far away. But still, you can never take too many photos. Also related to that, one thing we really encourage, and we do have some ship owners, we had a conversation with a few ship owners about this, they have their crews take routine pictures all the time, whether it's cargo operation, whether it's just whether they're pulling up to the terminal, when they're leaving the terminal, how they've left, the condition of the terminal when they leave, all kinds of pictures that one wouldn't think off the top of their head are vitally important until the vessel's gone and all of a sudden you get something from a local authority that says, oh, guess what you did to the terminal? And you're like, what? We did what? We don't have that. We have the records. So and also the same applies to cargo operations. We reflect some of that in some of our other guidance, like transport guidance to steel cargoes, or for steel cargoes, transport guidance for rice, bagged rice. We emphasize that too, and we can't emphasize that enough. And I say the same that's for photos and videos. So having before incident pictures and having the possibility of having after incident pictures is vitally important. So it's just getting a mindset for the crew to be taking pictures as often, as regularly as possible. One thing we always do or we try to do in our guidance is talk about do's and don'ts, and we focus a bit on that. The do's that should be done on board when it comes to collecting evidence, the don'ts. I just wanted to just list a few of them here. Again, you can look at the guidance and see what they say a little more explicitly, but we do have something, we do like to focus on that for members' consideration from our claims handling experience, and I'm sure from some of the incidents that you've had. That's important. So, I said here that collection of evidence because I prepared this presentation a few days ago, but actually it was released, the English version was released yesterday, thankfully, due to our social media team in New York. Do a fantastic job in prepping all the documentation together. Again, team effort, not only on the content, but also the presentation of things that we have. And there will be Mandarin versions which will be produced and go out in the coming weeks. And as I mentioned, what we like to do, particularly when it comes to a lot of the loss prevention materials that we prepare, we like to put our little twist on things. And one twist that we'd like to put on things, like what we've done with the bunker compendium, steel cargoes, the bagged rice cargo, and other topics that we have in our Good Catch initiative. We like preparing small, short videos. Those small, short videos are presentable. I always, when talking to members and brokers, and I try to remind you, we have a fantastic, actually, I think a very nice mobile app, and all these things are on the mobile app and accessible not only for those of you in the office, but also for the crew and seafarers. We know that they don't like to watch things which last 35 minutes unless it's a fun movie or show, but doing the work stuff, so we try to keep our animations short and sweet, and we have a series of animations that will follow in the coming months, and I'm working on with our service provider who does excellent work for us since 2004, IDIS IT out in Subic Bay, and we're preparing those, and we should probably hopefully see the first of the three animations come in January and probably March, and hopefully by May of next year. So those are to come. So as I always like to mention, give a shout out, everything that we do is on our website. Everything that we have, the only thing we have which is proprietary are the e-learning tools, which are for members. All members have access to that. They need a password, but that's the only thing. And I would say that represents maybe about 10% of what we actually have. So we really highly recommend, that you go on our website and find whatever information. And you can always contact me and our LP team or anyone here in Piraeus to direct you, and we'll assist you. So, on that note, E.Tadros, I appreciate it. And I'd like to introduce Dan now. Dan Tadros is, we're going to give us with a highlight of the afternoon. We'd like to give some recognitions, and Dan? Thanks, please. Thank you. All right.
It's great to see everybody here. This is a very important aspect of what we believe we all have an obligation to society at large, and it involves the human factor. And we like to recognize members, their operations groups, their crews, their vessels that do heroic acts and/or exemplary mentoring. And today we have 2 award winners. The first one, I'm going to read what the act is for so everyone understands what this award means. This was for outstanding humanitarian actions undertaken by the motor vessel Rukbat Star and her crew under the command of Captain Arafat, who on October 3rd, 2025, rescued 53 persons in distress in coordination with MRCC Las Palmas and the Moroccan Royal Navy. This act of seamanship, courage, and international cooperation exemplifies the highest traditions of the maritime community and the unwavering commitment to the safety of life at sea. And this first award, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in congratulating Atlantides Shipping Company. The second award is for humanitarian actions undertaken by the motor vessel Wadi Sahara and her crew under the command of Captain Sharif Sobi, who on 24 May 2025 rescued 110 persons in distress in the central Mediterranean. This act of seamanship, courage, and international cooperation again exemplifies the highest traditions of the maritime community and the unwavering commitment that we all have to safety of life at sea. And this award goes to National Navigation Company of Egypt, who unfortunately could not have a representative here today, but is one of our valued and strongest members, and we congratulate them. So I had prepared some remarks to thank everyone. Would you like me to say them? Because Dorothea is here. Would you like to hear from me or Dorothea? Thank you, thank you. I hope you all realize, and just by looking at everybody who's here and downstairs, this is a very important aspect of what a P&I Club should stand for. Loss prevention, bringing information to our members who can use it to help mitigate risk across the board. And today's topics, I think you will all join me, were fantastic. Things that are very germane to our daily operations, from cybersecurity to the preservation of evidence to the EU regulations and everything that comes with that. So I'd like to, with a hand of applause, thank our 4 exemplar speakers for all their contributions today. I also would like to thank our staff, the staff of the Piraeus office, our loss prevention department, for putting together yet another exceptional program. So thank you to them. And although we haven't really opened the floor to questions so that you can all contribute, just by looking at your faces, I feel like you really took something out of it. And our goal at every loss prevention event is for you to leave here even with one thing that you've learned. And that means everything to us. So thank you to all of you for joining us today. And on that note, the bar is open. Enjoy your drinks.